Welcome back, friends. Tonight we step barefoot into the marble courtyards and dusty marketplaces of ancient Greece, a place of epic myths, stern philosophers, and yes, really odd rules that would make your modern life, well, almost impossible. The air is thick with olive oil and the scent of grilled fish, cicadas buzz lazily in the trees, and somewhere off in the distance a lyre plucks out a haunting tune beneath a sky smeared with twilight. Sounds dreamy, right? Well, before you get too comfortable, hit like and subscribe, but only if I've earned it. No pressure, no hard feelings. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there. Now, go ahead and dim the lights, maybe curl up with a blanket, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. So here you are, stepping into ancient Greece, probably thinking you'll toss on a toga, sip some wine under a fig tree, and maybe chat about Plato's latest think piece. But hold on, first surprise, you're already dressed wrong, and not just wrong like socks with sandals wrong, more like immediately suspicious and probably disrespectful wrong. You reach for your tunic, a chiton, if you're trying to sound fancy, but did you tie it right? Is your hymation, that's the cloak, draped over the correct shoulder? Because yes, they did care which shoulder, and if you're a woman, good luck. Your clothing has to signal your social class, marital status, and even which festival you're going to. Spoiler, fashion freedom is not trending in the 5th century BCE. And speaking of women, you, if you're female, are supposed to be pretty much invisible in public. Ideally, you wouldn't be walking around at all. You'd be inside, weaving wool and supervising slaves, stepping out for even a quick market run. That's risky business. You might get side-eyed or outright heckled, because modesty wasn't just a virtue, it was a social straitjacket. Now, if you're male, congratulations, you're allowed outside. But don't celebrate too fast. You'd better be well-groomed and neatly dressed, because public image is everything. Beard unkempt, cloak askew, people are judging. Even your sandals, if you're wearing them, must suit the setting. Philosophers like Diogenes famously went barefoot to protest social norms. You're not Diogenes, though. You're just trying not to get yelled at by an old man on a marble bench. And oh, let's not forget the gymnasium. It's not just a gym, it's a hub of social and intellectual life. And yes, you're expected to be nude. That's right, completely. It's not weird here, it's traditional. But for you, you're probably clutching an invisible towel and wondering where the lockers are. Nope, no lockers. Just olive oil, strigils to scrape off sweat, and a lot of eye contact you did not ask for. The good news is, you're not totally alone in your confusion. Historians still argue whether strict dress rules applied evenly across all city-states. Some say places like Sparta had looser expectations, especially for women, who were known to exercise publicly and wear shorter chitons. Others think these tales were exaggerated, possibly by jealous Athenians. Oh, and remember the Olympics. Those weren't just athletic contests, they were also very public, very naked and very rule-heavy. If you show up wearing anything, disqualified. If you're a woman even watching, that's illegal. Unless you're a priestess of Demeter, in which case, carry on, noble lady. Everyone else, avert your eyes. And while we're here, one quirky fashion tidbit. Ancient Greeks believed that wearing red shoes could ward off evil spirits. So if you're feeling paranoid, maybe grab a pair. Just be ready to explain yourself to Plato. Then there's mourning dress. If someone dies in your family, you switch to black garments and stay that way for up to a year. Not optional. Forget to wear black. Your neighbours might assume you're disrespecting the dead, or worse, inviting a haunting. And nobody wants an angry shade whispering from the underworld just because you chose beige. Let's rewind to your first day in town. You walk into the agora, the bustling marketplace, hoping to blend in. Instead, people are staring. A woman scowls, a child whispers, a vendor calls out, "Hey, Thracian," which is basically the ancient version of calling you a tourist. Turns out your tunic's the wrong length, your sandals are foreign, and, tragically, you're wearing purple, which is super extra unless you're royalty or at a Dionysian party. Even hair has rules. If you're male, your beard should be full and dignified unless you're Spartan. Then you might shave your upper lip but leave the rest, which looks a little unsettling. If you're mourning, you might even cut your hair short as a sign of grief. Or if you're a prisoner, your hair might be forcibly shaved, because humiliation through grooming is totally on brand for ancient Greece. And don't get any ideas about personal flair. Jewellery is minimal for men, elaborate for elite women, and deeply symbolic. Wearing a certain amulet. You're telling the world your family worships Apollo, got gold pins in your chiton. Either you're loaded or trying very hard to appear so. Either way, expect gossip. Fashion isn't expression, it's a signal. Every stitch tells a story. Your class, your morals, your beliefs. Break the dress code and you're not just unfashionable, you're disruptive, maybe even suspicious. Because in a culture obsessed with moderation and order, looking off is practically a philosophical crime. So no, you can't just throw on yoga pants and a hoodie. That's not cosy. That's unthinkable. Your comfort is irrelevant. Your identity, pre-approved by your polis. Remember, this is a world where aesthetics and ethics hold hands. How you present yourself is who you are. Socrates might talk about inner virtue, but even he wore an old plain cloak on purpose, to make a point. Meanwhile, you're standing here in linen that wrinkles too fast, sweating under the Mediterranean sun, praying no one notices your tunic is stitched on the wrong side. And someone does notice. They always do. So now that you've been judged head to sandal for your outfit, let's move on to your stomach, because it's dinner time. Or at least it would be, if you weren't in ancient Greece. You think you're hungry around 6 p.m? Cute. These people don't even start thinking about dinner until the stars are out and the air's gone cool. You're pacing the courtyard like a hungry ghost while your Greek neighbours are still sipping watered-down wine and reciting poetry. And when the food finally comes, well, you might want to lower your expectations. There's no feta-stuffed anything, no creamy moussaka, and definitely no baklava dripping with honey. What you get is barley bread, maybe some olives, a splash of wine, and if you're lucky, a tiny sliver of grilled fish or goat cheese. Meat, that's for sacrifices or parties. If you're craving steak, you'd better hope someone nearby just made an offering to Zeus. You sit down at a low table, cross-legged, and reach for a bite. But be careful, eating with your left hand, rude. Talking with your mouth full, barbaric. And garlic breath, social suicide. If you're headed to a symposium later, a kind of elite drinking and philosophy night, garlic is banned. Not officially, of course, but if you want to be invited back, skip the stinky stuff. Ah, the symposium. That's where the real culinary oddities come in. You show up expecting snacks and conversation, but instead you're reclined awkwardly on a couch with your elbow going numb, and you're handed a cup of wine that's weirdly watery, because Greek wine is always diluted. Only barbarians, Persians mostly, drink it straight. You'd probably try to play it cool, sip and nod, but your face gives away the disappointment. Then the food arrives. It's modest. More bread, more olives, maybe some roasted chickpeas. The host might throw in something fancy like honeyed locusts or boiled octopus tentacles if he wants to show off. And if you're feeling brave enough to try the fish head stew. Just remember, burping at the table is not considered a compliment to the chef. Now here comes the weird part, the wine mixing. The guests vote on the ratio of water to wine, and the symposiarch, kind of like a party referee, enforces the mix. Get too drunk? You're a disgrace. Stay completely sober? Also suspicious. There's a narrow sweet spot where you're supposed to get just philosophical enough to impress your neighbours without falling off the couch. Of course, if you're a woman, you're probably not even here. Unless you're a hetaera, a high-class courtesan who's educated, witty and allowed into male spaces. But don't mistake inclusion for respect. You're there to entertain, not to debate Socratic ethics. And if you're just a regular wife, you're at home, alone, possibly weaving. Historians still argue whether everyday meals were truly that sparse, or whether our view is skewed by idealised art in elite writings. Some evidence suggests wealthier households enjoyed stews, fruits and sweets, far more often than scholars once believed. But your average Athenian? Probably chewing a fig and pretending it's cake. You try to sneak a snack midday, maybe a hunk of bread or a dried date. But public eating is frowned upon unless you're a child, elderly or seriously unwell. So you do it in secret, nibbling behind a column like a criminal in need of a snack lawyer. And forget about breakfast. There is a thing called akratisma, usually just bread dipped in diluted wine. But don't expect pancakes or coffee. You chew your crusty barley loaf, wine sloshing in a cheap clay cup, and wonder if the gods ever invented espresso. Oh, speaking of gods, don't eat anything without making a little offering first. Even a grape deserves a whisper of thanks to Demeter. You skip it. That's how you end up with a spoiled harvest or an offended nymph. Offerings are everywhere, Spilled wine on the ground, a crumb left on an altar, a fig placed gently near a statue's foot. Then there's the food taboos. Certain festivals have strict dietary rules. During the Thesmophoria, for example, women fast, or eat only specific sacred foods like sesame cakes or pine nuts. If you're caught munching on the wrong thing at the wrong time, even accidentally, you risk divine offence, or at least some very aggressive side-eye from your pious neighbour. And here's a quirky tidbit for your next awkward dinner silence. In some coastal cities, squid ink was used not just for writing, but also mixed with vinegar as a delicacy. Tastes like betrayal and ocean brine. Still want that bite? You eye the empty table long after the modest meal's done. No dessert, no sweet finale. Maybe a fig, maybe a spoonful of honey if your host is feeling generous. Ancient Greek cuisine wasn't about indulgence. It was about balance, about avoiding hubris, even in your appetite. Eat too much, you're mocked. Eat too little, you're weak. Either way, you lose. And don't ask for seconds like it's a buffet. That's gauche. Meals are shared communally, and portion control is determined by status, not hunger. You, visitor from the future, are probably at the bottom of the pecking order, literally and socially. You might be wondering now, did no one just snack for fun? Well, there were vendors selling street foods like fried fish bits or stuffed grape leaves. But again, the rules were fuzzy. Some elites saw that kind of eating as low class. Others, especially in bustling port towns like Piraeus, embraced it. But you're still wiping your mouth on your sleeve and realising there are no napkins, just your hymation. And yes, that's the same one you were judged for earlier. Good luck. And as you make your way back home, stomach half full and dignity slightly bruised, you pass a woman selling garlands near a shrine. She offers you a dried fig wrapped in bay leaves. You take it, nod respectfully, and this time, you remember to whisper a quick thank you to Demeter. See, you're learning. You're lying awake on a straw-stuffed mat, belly still a little rumbly from that modest dinner, and now it hits you. You miss your shower, or even just your tap. Any faucet, really. But here in ancient Greece, your concept of bathing is about to be turned inside out and shaken like a dusty tunic. You rise early, because that's what respectable citizens do, and head out in search of the lutron, the communal bathhouse. You're picturing steaming tile rooms and fluffy towels. That's adorable. What you find instead is a wide, chilly stone basin, a few clay jars and a man standing next to a goat, arguing with a child about soap. The truth? Hot baths aren't exactly the norm here. Cold water is king. You pour a jug over your head and try not to scream as it shocks your entire nervous system. Welcome to your refreshing cleanse. There's no privacy, no curtains, just bodies, benches and water that somehow never feels clean, no matter how often it's replaced. And soap? Sort of. The Greeks use a kind of soft clay or ash mixture, but more commonly it's olive oil. You smear it on, let it sit, and then scrape it off with a curved bronze tool called a strigil. Sounds kind of spa-like, until you realise everyone else is doing it next to you, scraping oil, sweat and who knows what into a communal gutter. Hygienic, debatable, relaxing, not even a little. The strigil experience, by the way, takes practice. Too gentle and nothing comes off. Too rough and you're one bad move from drawing blood. You wince as you attempt it, wondering if anyone's invented loofahs yet. And if you're a woman, public baths are rare. Some cities allow designated times or separate facilities, but it's hit or miss. Most likely you're bathing at home, if you're rich, or relying on servants to help haul water. Buckets, every single time. Bathing becomes a whole event, like moving a piano, but with more nudity and less applause. Historians still argue whether Greek attitudes toward hygiene were stricter than we give them credit for, or whether later Roman influence made everything seem more advanced by comparison. Some inscriptions mention fines for dirty appearance in the agora, while others suggest many Athenians went days without a real wash. It's hard to pin down whether their aversion to heat-based bathing was medical myth, cultural habit, or both. One fringe theory even suggests that the Greeks believed cold baths preserved one's energy, while hot water made men soft. That's not metaphorical. They literally thought it drained your strength and dulled your mind. So much for your relaxing soak with candles. Now, imagine you've just exercised at the gymnasium. You're sweaty, dust-covered, and your olive oil has turned your skin into a sticky mess. You need to clean up, but there's a line for the Lutron, and it's full of philosophers debating virtue while flicking toe sand into the runoff channel. You wait your turn. You try not to stare. Someone starts quoting Hesiod's works and days about cleanliness being next to something. You finally get your chance. One boy is scraping the back of another with a strigil that clearly hasn't been cleaned between users. You think about bacteria, then you remember no one knows about bacteria. You clench your teeth and accept your fate. Oh, and the floor is slippery. Like fall and dislocate your entire legacy. Slippery. There's no lifeguard, no rubber mats, just marble, algae, and regret. You cling to the side like a confused sea creature and hope no one notices your panic. After your bath, you can't just throw on your clothes and call it a day. No, first you have to re-oil your skin. That's the good stuff. Scented olive oil with herbs like thyme or lavender if you're fancy. Not just to smell nice, but to protect from the sun and, oddly, bugs. It's your lotion, cologne and SPF all in one. Unless you're poor. Then you're using whatever's left at the bottom of the shared jar, if anything. There's also a thing called peribolos etiquette. That's the unspoken rule that you don't stare, don't hover, and absolutely don't ask awkward questions. You broke all three before breakfast. One man still side-eyeing you over your weird hair towel situation. And about towels, there aren't any. Just your cloak. Reused. Again. Hope you remembered which part touched your armpit. Back at your home, maybe. Just maybe. You have a terracotta bath basin. If you're well off. You could heat water on the hearth, carry it bucket by bucket, and finally settle into something like a proper soak. But that takes hours, and you still have to empty it afterward by hand. Ever tried hauling 10 gallons of bathwater without splashing your entire living space? Your clay floor says, challenge accepted. You flop onto your mat later, freshly scraped, sore from crouching, and still not convinced you're cleaner than before. You long for soap that foams. You dream of warm water pressure and a loofah sponge that doesn't grow in a Mediterranean swamp. Here's your quirky trivia to file away for dinner parties. Some elite Greeks used perfume not just on their skin, but on their hair, their clothes, and even their furniture. Lavender-scented cushions, jasmine-tinged cloaks. Sure, why not? You try dabbing some rose oil behind your ears, hoping it masks the faint scent of sweaty olive pits. And just when you think you're done, someone knocks. A neighbour dropping off a gift. Dried herbs for your next bath. Thoughtful, sure, but also a hint. A reminder. You're the weird one. The outsider. The one who still hasn't learned how to scrape gracefully. Next time, maybe just skip the gymnasium. Or learn to enjoy smelling vaguely like salad dressing. You wake up to birds squabbling in a fig tree and the faint clatter of pottery in a nearby courtyard. Your muscles ache from yesterday's olive oil scrape session, and as you stretch, it hits you again. This isn't a vacation. You live here now, and it's time to get to work. Except, what work actually means is about to frustrate every modern instinct you have. Because in ancient Greece, you don't just pick a job. You don't swipe through listings, chase your passion, or dream of starting your own kombucha brand. Your career path is more or less stamped on your forehead at birth, thanks to your gender, your family, and your social status. Let's say you're a male citizen of Athens. Sounds promising, right? Not so fast. Even as a free man, your options are tangled up in expectation. Are you born into a farming family? Congratulations. You're ploughing barley fields outside the city walls, whether you like it or not. Son of a potter? Guess what you're doing until your back gives out. You can't just decide one morning, I think I'll be a playwright. Unless your family has money or connections, that's a hard no. Even worse if you're a metic, a non-citizen resident. You might have lived in Athens for years, paid your taxes and contributed to society, but you'll never own land, never vote, and never hold public office. Your job choices are even more limited. Merchant, craftsman, trader. And even if you're amazing at it, no social mobility for you. Just polite nods and closed doors. Now, if you're enslaved, which statistically speaking is very possible, you don't get a choice at all. You're born into it or captured into it, and your job is whatever your master decides today. Could be housework, mining, teaching, rowing, or literally walking a boy to school while carrying his lunch and reciting poetry. That's a real thing. It's called being a Paidagogos, and it's one of the more dignified posts if you're lucky. And then there's women. Oh, you sweet ambitious soul, brace yourself. Because no matter how brilliant or skilled you are, your job is to stay home. Specifically to manage the oikos, the household. That means spinning wool, organising the pantry, overseeing enslaved servants, and raising kids. That's it. If you're seen outside too often, people whisper. If you speak too much in public, people judge. The dream of becoming a doctor, scholar, or even merchant. Not in this timeline. Historians still argue whether women in less rigid city-states like Sparta had more autonomy in their work lives. Some evidence suggests Spartan women controlled land, oversaw estates, and received physical training alongside men. But was that freedom, or just another version of state control moulded to produce stronger warriors? The debate continues, whispered between dusty scrolls. But let's say, for argument's sake, you're a man with some privilege. You decide to join the Athenian navy. Now, you're a rower. Sounds heroic until you realise this means sitting on a wooden bench for hours, rowing in sync with 170 other exhausted, sunburned dudes, while someone shouts at you in rhythm. Blisters, backaches, sea spray in your eyes, and no chance to Instagram it. You live for your daily ration of onions and a splash of wine. Prefer the arts? You can become a sculptor or painter, but good luck making a living from it unless a rich patron takes interest. Most artists are anonymous. You won't be famous, you won't sign your work, and forget creative freedom. You sculpt what your patron wants. Gods, athletes, or heroic nudity. Often all three. Or maybe you want to teach. That's more promising, especially if you're a philosopher. You gather students in a shady grove, charge them fees, and hope they listen, instead of asking endless, annoying questions like, what is virtue? Spoiler, they always ask. But even then, you're vulnerable. Teach the wrong ideas. Say, challenge the state too hard, and you risk more than losing tenure. Socrates? Famously sentenced to death for corrupting the youth and not respecting the gods. So yes, your dream job can absolutely end in a poisoned cup of hemlock. There's also public office, if you're a male citizen with some clout. But it's not a full-time job. More like a civic duty you rotate into, sort of like jury duty mixed with PTA meetings and surprise ethical dilemmas. You might spend a month overseeing weights and measures at the marketplace, then be dismissed with a handshake and a wreath. The fringe oddity here. Some public roles are filled by lottery. That's right, random draw. Want to oversee temple finances or manage a festival? Put your name in a jar and cross your fingers. Meritocracy. Never heard of her. You meanwhile decide maybe farming sounds stable. You trudge out at dawn to a rocky hillside where the soil barely clings to the earth. No tractors, no irrigation system. Just a wooden plough, a mule with attitude and a prayer to Demeter. You scatter barley seeds and wonder how many months it'll take for your back to resemble a ship's rigging rope. And then there's the matter of reputation. Even if your work feeds a dozen people or creates beauty or builds ships, your job is judged first by its nobility. Manual labour, looked down on, craftsmanship, useful but lesser. The truly respected professions, rhetoric, politics, military leadership, none of which you can access unless the gods smile and your grandfather knew the right people. And when the workday ends, if it ever truly does, you can't just scroll on your phone or order takeout. You walk home past shuttered workshops, dusty colonnades, and the smell of smoke curling from cooking fires. Your fingers are stained, your sandals are worn, and you've still got half a scroll's worth of obligations tomorrow. One final detail for your trivia bank. Some ancient Greeks believed in a job-specific patron deity. Smiths might pray to Hephaestus, farmers to Demeter, sailors to Poseidon. You mutter a confused prayer to all three just in case. And when you finally reach your mat and lie down, your modern brain aches with the injustice, the lack of choice, the absence of dreams. You're not an astronaut, a coder, or a novelist. You're just someone's son, or someone's wife, or someone's property, locked in a labour role assigned centuries ago. The stars blink quietly overhead. A meal brays in the distance. You close your eyes and whisper into the dark, I miss my resume. Morning light creeps through the slatted shutters, and before your eyes have even fully opened, someone's already muttering about dowries in the courtyard. That's your first clue. Today, your role in ancient Greece is about to get deeply personal. Welcome to marriage. But not the kind with white dresses and slow dancing and vows about love and forever. Nope, this is more like an awkward merger between families, with a side of teenage bride and zero say from you. Let's start with the basics. You don't choose your spouse. That's adorable and completely modern of you. Here, marriages are arranged, typically by your father, or another male guardian if he's not around. Love? Not even in the top 5 priorities. The checklist goes something like this. 1. Are they fertile? 2. Are they respectable? 3. Is the dowry good? 4. Will this alliance help our status? 5. And oh yeah, do they live nearby? Because long-distance relationships are laughably unthinkable. If you're a girl, brace yourself. You're probably around 13 to 15 years old. Your future husband? Likely twice your age, maybe more. You won't meet him alone beforehand. You won't write love letters. You won't even speak to him much before the wedding. But hey, your dad says he's a solid citizen and owns 2 fig orchards, so it's a win, right? Now, if you're a guy, congratulations. You have slightly more agency, but not much. Your family still pushes for a match that serves your clan. You might end up marrying a teenager, which feels unsettling to say the least. You try not to think about it too hard as the matchmaker praises her dowry in drachmas and linen. And yes, the dowry. That's the real star of this show. It's not optional, it's essential. The bride's family offers money, land, or goods to the groom's household to help offset the burden of taking her in. Because clearly having a wife who'll run your home, bear your children, and die in childbirth at 32 is a financial drain. You nod awkwardly as everyone discusses your future marriage like they're buying livestock. On wedding day, there's no lavish cake or romantic first dance. There's a feast, sure, but it's more about displaying your household's wealth and parading your virgin bride than celebrating any emotional bond. She wears a veil, you wear your best chiton, and there are torches. Lots of torches. One fringe tradition involves escorting the bride from her family's home to yours at night, with a solemn procession, the veil hiding her face like she's being smuggled across a border. Once inside, she's officially yours, in every sense. The ceremony's done. The law recognises her as part of your household. She'll now call you Kyrios, her lord and legal representative. You gulp. She looks terrified. This is normal. Historians still argue whether some couples grew to love each other over time, or whether affection was rare in these transactional arrangements. Some poetry from the era suggests deep bonds could form, especially in older age. But most of the time, it's more function than feeling. And if you're a woman, your job from day one is crystal clear. Produce legitimate children, preferably male. Many male. Girls are acceptable, but less exciting. Your worth is directly tied to your fertility. Can't conceive? Your husband might borrow someone else to get the job done. It's not personal, it's lineage. And don't think for a second that childbirth happens in a hospital. It's women only. Your mother, maybe a midwife, a friend or two, and a small statue of Artemis in the corner watching silently. Pain relief? None. Anesthetics? Also none. The survival rate? Honestly, don't ask. You pray, scream, and hope the neighbours aren't counting contractions through the wall. Now let's say you're the husband. You're expected to kind of respect your wife, but she's not your equal. You might speak with her, sure, but your intellectual debates, those happen at the symposium with other men or hetairai. Your wife runs the house, raises the kids, and stays out of sight when company comes. If she laughs too loudly or walks outside unaccompanied, neighbours notice, and you're judged. Not her, you, because a loose wife reflects a weak man. But here's a quirky curveball. In some city-states, if a husband stays away for too long, say off at war or sailing with the merchant fleet, the wife has legal grounds to demand a divorce. Yes, really. Women couldn't vote or own land, but a missing husband. That's her loophole. Divorce is surprisingly common, though usually initiated by the man. No court drama, just a formal statement and the return of the dowry. The woman goes back to her father's house like a library book that's been returned in good condition. If you're divorced, female, and still fertile, you might get married off again before the year's out. Clock's ticking after all. But the social cost is huge. A divorced woman is still seen as property passed around. A widowed one, less scandalous but still a burden. You might live with your adult son, if you had one. If not, it's the lonely life of weaving and praying. Again. One particularly fringe tidbit. Some Greeks believed you could influence your unborn child's traits based on what the pregnant woman looked at. Want a strong son? Surround her with statues of heroes. Want a gentle daughter? Bring her soft, flowing fabrics and poetry readings. You smirk now, but at the time, this was cutting-edge prenatal science. Meanwhile, affection within marriage is complicated. Public displays of love are rare. You don't kiss on the street or whisper sweet nothings. But occasionally someone like Euripides or Menander will slip a line into a play that suggests a husband actually misses his wife. The crowd laughs, half in disbelief. Love? In marriage? What next? Dogs as pets? Speaking of which, even pets have more visible affection in some homes than wives do. You walk through the agora and see a man cradling a tiny dog while barely acknowledging his silent, veiled spouse walking 6 paces behind. And finally, the mother-in-law. She lives with you. Always. She helps manage the house, critiques everything from your olive jar storage to your stitching, and probably reminds your new bride daily that her loom skills are acceptable. If you're the bride, you silently hope for a plague. If you're the groom, you pretend not to notice the daily passive-aggressive oaths being muttered under everyone's breath. Marriage, in ancient Greece, is less about love and more about duty, family, legacy, reputation. It's woven into the very fabric of society, tighter than a warp-weighted loom. You sigh as your spouse lays beside you in the quiet dark, neither of you speaking. Not from animosity, just habit. You wonder if one day you'll talk about something deeper than what needs mending or what sacrifices to make this month. Maybe, but only after the dowry's paid, the children are born, and the house is finally quiet. You've barely gotten used to the whole married at 15 with a goat-based dowry thing when another curveball hits you. Someone accuses your cousin of stealing a statue head, and suddenly you're swept into the heart of ancient Greece's legal system. And, spoiler alert, it makes modern courtrooms look like gentle kindergarten debates. You think maybe there's a judge, maybe some calm testimony, maybe an orderly trial. Oh no. Here in Athens, trials are public spectacles. Picture hundreds, sometimes up to 500, citizen jurors packed into a massive open-air court, sun beating down on polished marble, bees buzzing somewhere near the olive trees, and absolutely zero air conditioning. It's not just the stakes that are high, it's the volume. Here's the twist that really throws you. There are no lawyers. None. You speak for yourself. You write your own speech or pay a professional logographer to write it for you, and then you perform it. Nervous, sweaty, and very aware that hundreds of your fellow citizens are judging both your guilt and your grammar. The charges, pretty broad. Theft, slander, impiety, failure to repay debts, tossing chamber pots too close to the agora. Yes, really. Someone once sued over that. You could find yourself on trial for wounding someone's goat or insulting someone's father's beard. Public and private lawsuits blur together. Everything's personal and political. And get this, the jurors are chosen by lottery that morning. You show up early, name gets pulled, boom, you're suddenly deciding whether your neighbour loses property, reputation, or in serious cases, his life. There's no sequestering, no jury instructions, no cute little deliberation room with coffee, just secret ballots. You drop a token in the guilty or not guilty urn, and that's it. If you're the one on trial, good luck. You're allowed a specific time to speak, measured by a clepsydra, a water clock that trickles ominously while you stammer through your defence. When the water runs out, so does your chance. Hope you weren't saving your best argument for the end. Historians still argue whether the Athenian legal system was genuinely democratic or more of a performative mob rule dressed up in robes and sandals. On paper, it empowered the average citizen. In practice, if you couldn't speak well or your enemy had more charisma, you were toast. Charm counted. So did who you knew and which gods you honoured. You shift uncomfortably in the courtroom, clutching your speech tablet. Your cousin is shaking. He swears he didn't steal the statue head. It just rolled off the pedestal. You try to look convincing as the jurors squint, frown, mutter, and blow crumbs off their voting discs. And then there's the penalties. They're not always proportionate. Someone convicted of a minor insult might be fined more than someone who broke a law about building codes. Why? Because you propose your own penalty. That's right. After you're found guilty, you suggest your punishment. The prosecution suggests theirs, the jury picks between the two. So if you lowball and they highball, yikes. It gets better. Some trials are even more chaotic. The Graphi Paranorman lets citizens challenge laws themselves, putting lawmakers on trial. Imagine suing your senator for suggesting Tuesday voting. If the jury agrees it's a bad idea, the law is tossed, and the senator, fined, possibly exiled. You're starting to miss traffic court. Now let's say you're the one suing. Congratulations. You better hope you can afford witnesses, because those don't always show up voluntarily. You might have to pay them or drag them in physically, and while witnesses do speak, their words aren't exactly cross-examined. There's no legal code to lean on, just precedent, persuasion, and how convincingly you can quote Homer. One quirky detail: if you're over 60, you can be summoned for more serious juror duty. Why? Because older men were assumed to be wiser, more impartial, and less hormonal. That's a direct quote from an orator, by the way. Apparently, justice in Athens peaks after your knees start giving out. And don't even try to interrupt someone during their speech. It's considered incredibly rude, unless you're shouting support. Yes, the crowd can heckle, boo, or clap during a trial. Imagine trying to explain your innocence while someone in the back yells, "That's what you said last festival, thief!" Meanwhile, you're drenched in sweat, voice cracking, desperate to remember whether you thanked Apollo or Artemis before entering court this morning. Because yes, divine favour matters. Some people wore amulets or burned incense before trials. Others quoted omens. One guy even showed up with a dove on his shoulder, claiming it represented Athena's blessing. He still lost. The worst cases, one's about impiety. Say the wrong thing about the gods and you're suddenly a public menace. That's how Socrates ended up with a death sentence. Your freedom of speech only goes as far as the gods let it. Speak recklessly about the pantheon, and you're not just out of favour, you're out of time. Punishments range from fines to flogging to exile, sometimes even death. But here's the kicker: no prisons. Not like you'd think anyway. Athens didn't build big holding cells for convicts. Punishments were fast and final. If you're fined and can't pay, you might be stripped of citizenship. If sentenced to death, it's a small cup of hemlock. You sip, you wait, you lie down. Done. Now, there were holding cells for pre-trial detention or debtors, but they were grim. Stone rooms, no sanitation, no windows, more pit than prison. You'd rather take your chances with the jury. You watch as the water clock gurgles its final drops. Your cousin delivers his closing line, something about the dignity of statues and the honesty of family. Not bad. You squint at the jurors, who are already filing past the ballot boxes. Moments later, the votes are counted. The result? Guilty, but the penalty is a small fine. No exile, no public whipping, just a stern warning and a reputation hit. You exhale. That went better than expected. Still, you vow to avoid legal trouble at all costs. Say sorry quickly. Avoid stepping on sacred statues. And never ever mention anything remotely suspicious about Zeus within earshot of a loud amphora salesman. As you leave the court and step into the sunlit agora, you pass a graffiti-scratched wall that reads, "Justice is blind, but Athens squints." You smile. That feels about right. You're walking home after court. Nerves fried, tongue dry, and utterly convinced you're going to avoid trouble forever. But avoiding humans in ancient Greece, easier than avoiding the gods. Because in this world, divine beings are everywhere. And they're not just watching, they're judging, interfering, and occasionally hurling metaphorical lightning bolts into your dinner plans. Step wrong near a temple, offend a statue with your sweaty tunic, forget to offer thanks before a meal. That's a spiritual faux pas that could echo across your entire household. Ancient Greek life isn't just religious, it's suffused with gods. You don't worship on Sundays, you live on their schedule every single day. And these gods, they aren't your chill, benevolent types. No, they're petty, jealous, vengeful, and, let's be honest, a bit dramatic. You don't just believe in them because of faith. You believe in them because your neighbour's cousin didn't sacrifice a chicken once, and 3 days later a bolt of lightning took out his olive tree. Coincidence? Not in this timeline. Your day starts not with breakfast, but with a libation, a small offering of wine poured out on the ground. You mutter something about health, or peace, or please don't smite me, and only then do you dare take a sip yourself. You might also burn a pinch of incense in a tiny clay dish, waving it awkwardly toward the hearth like you're trying to bribe invisible house inspectors. Even the mundane is sacred. Tying your sandal, better hope you didn't miss a holy day dedicated to Hermes, planting new barley shoots. Say a few words to Demeter, or she might shrivel your harvest just to make a point. Historians still argue whether the average Greek truly believed the gods interfered daily, or simply played along because society demanded it. Some scholars suggest that the rituals were more about social cohesion than actual belief. But try explaining that to a priest who just caught you skipping festival prep. And speaking of festivals, there are so many. Almost one every month, sometimes two, depending on your city-state. Athens alone celebrates over 120 religious events a year. You'd think that sounds fun, right? Day off, bit of dancing, maybe a fig cake. Sure. But it's also your civic duty. You're expected to attend, help prepare, even participate. Skipping a festival isn't like calling in sick. It's like skipping jury duty, Thanksgiving dinner, and church at the same time. Right now, for instance, it's the Dionysia, a days-long party honouring Dionysus, god of wine, theatre, and glorious excess. The city shuts down. People wear ivy crowns and drink until their sandals slip off. Plays are performed all day, some tragic, some comedic, and yes, sometimes very nude. You try to enjoy yourself, but halfway through the third chorus about goat sacrifice, your brain starts melting. Next month, the Panathenaea. Think Olympic-level processions, chariot races, and a massive peplos robe woven over months and presented to the statue of Athena. You help carry baskets of grain while sweating profusely under your ceremonial cloak, praying not to trip. Someone always trips. It's tradition. Then there's the Thesmophoria, an all-women fertility festival involving underground pits, symbolic fasting, and possibly rotting pig remains. Don't ask. If you're a man, you're absolutely not allowed. So naturally some playwrights mocked it by imagining what would happen if men snuck in wearing wigs. You laugh nervously, but still keep your distance. Even business is interrupted for religious holidays. You might be halfway through a pottery order when the city calls a sacred truce, so athletes can travel safely to Olympia. Everything halts. You close your workshop and go watch someone wrestle oiled and extremely undressed, while a priest sacrifices a bull nearby. And don't even think about building something new without checking in with the local gods. Planning a storage room addition, you'd better consult the augur. Planning a wedding, choose the date based on lunar cycles and divine calendars. Planning a trip, sacrifice something small, maybe a bird so you don't end up lost at sea and blamed for dishonouring Poseidon. Here's your quirky tidbit of the night. In some rural areas, people used to whisper prayers to Pan before entering forests, because Pan, half goat, full troublemaker, was known to startle humans into irrational terror. That's literally where the word panic comes from. So yes, you're scared of trees now. Welcome. You pass a shrine on your way home. It's a tiny alcove with a votive figurine and bits of dried fruit. Someone left a coin. You pause. You don't have a coin. Do you go on and risk a curse? Do you offer a hair from your head or a handful of barley from your pouch? You overthink it. That's also tradition. At home, your family lights the hearth, a sacred fire watched over by Hestia, goddess of domestic peace. It never goes out, ever. If it does, you have to perform a purification ritual and relight it from a public flame, or your home is considered spiritually compromised. Bad luck. Worse than broken mirrors. You glance at the hearth, still glowing. Good. And here's the thing that really messes with your modern head. There's no single priestly class. No Pope of Olympus. Every city has its own local rituals. Priests are often chosen by lottery or inherited positions, not by divine calling. You could wake up one morning and find out you're in charge of tending to the sacred snake under Athena's temple stairs. You're terrified of snakes. Too bad. But let's not forget omens. You start noticing that people take everything as a sign. A sneeze? That's Apollo saying go for it. A bird flying left? Bad luck. Even dreams are serious business. People travel miles to visit the temple of Asclepius just to sleep inside it, hoping the healing god sends them a cure in a dream. The temple's full of people curled up on mats, mumbling in their sleep. One man dreams of snakes licking his sore foot. He wakes up healed. You wake up bitten and confused. And just when you think you've gotten the hang of all this godly red tape, your neighbour casually mentions that he's sacrificing a rooster because his grapes turned sour and he suspects a curse. You nod. You don't question it. You borrow a rooster, just in case. Because here's the truth in ancient Greece. The gods don't need you to believe in them. They expect you to behave. One wrong move, and it's not just your harvest or your goat that suffers. It's your family, your name, your future. Piety isn't optional. It's armour. You kneel at the altar before bed, whisper a prayer to Hermes for safe dreams, then pause. Was it Hermes for dreams? Or Hypnos? Or Morpheus? You sigh. You light another bit of incense just to be sure. You hope they're listening. You'd think with all the praying, processioning and worrying about which god controls your fig tree, the ancient Greeks might let you rest. But no. Now it's time for your body to earn its keep. You stretch, blink in the golden morning light, and try to sneak past the gate without anyone noticing you skipped the gymnasium. Doesn't work. A teenage boy in a short tunic yells, "Late again!" and points toward the exercise yard. Welcome to the daily workout, ancient Greece style. And no, it's not optional. Physical fitness here isn't a hobby, it's a moral obligation. To be healthy is to be virtuous. To be weak or flabby is to be suspect. You drag your feet toward the palaestra where sweat, dust and a total lack of deodorant await, and right away the first thing you notice. Everyone's naked. Completely. You wrap your cloak tighter, but eventually you have to conform. You shed your chiton and hope no one comments on your very un-Herculean biceps. The gym is a democracy of bare skin. Everyone sees everything. And they're judging your form, physically and philosophically. Because in ancient Greece, training the body is as important as training the mind. The word gymnasium itself means place to be naked. It's not just about abs or strength. It's about cultivating your ideal self. You jog in circles, legs kicking up dirt, and someone quotes Pindar beside you while doing lunges. Today's workout, wrestling, javelin and discus. Tomorrow, sprinting and long jump. No machines, no protein shakes, just olive oil, competitive pride, and dirt in your teeth. But first, you oil up. Yes, really. You rub olive oil all over your body, not to moisturise, but to protect from sunburn and trap sweat. Then comes the dusting, tossing fine sand on the skin to improve grip. You're now a glistening, sand-covered statue come to life. And then you wrestle. You hit the ground with a thud. Your opponent pins you with a grin. You try to remember the philosophical value of humility while coughing up dust. Somewhere nearby, a philosopher nods approvingly. You feel seen, not in a good way. Historians still argue whether all city-states were equally obsessed with athleticism. While Athens focused on balance, mind and body, Sparta was all in on warrior fitness. Boys trained from age 7. Women too. Wrestling, running, even spear throwing. For Spartans, the gymnasium was basically daycare with bruises. In Athens, there's more poetry, more discussion, but the expectation of physical strength still runs deep. And yes, women did exercise in some places. In Sparta, girls ran races and trained in public. In Athens, not so much. If you're female here, your workout options are pretty much weaving, and maybe walking in the courtyard while pretending to inspect the herbs. But if you're Spartan, you're throwing a javelin next to your brothers while your mother yells, "Make them fear you!" One quirky tidbit. Some athletes believed rubbing wild herbs, like pennyroyal or mint, on their muscles gave them strength and endurance. You try it once, it burns, a lot. You stick to plain olive oil after that. Now, let's say you show real promise. You can throw a discus farther than anyone in your dem. Suddenly you're training for the Pan-Hellenic Games, Olympia, Delphi, Izmir, Nemea. They rotate, each honouring a different god, each with its own rituals. The Olympics, the biggest deal of all. Every 4 years, entire cities declare truces just so athletes can travel safely. Yes, war stops for sports. That's how serious this is. You arrive in Olympia after weeks on foot, sandaled and sunburnt. You undergo a month of supervised training, swear an oath to Zeus, and then, if you're accepted, you compete nude in front of thousands. If you win, your reward is an olive wreath, eternal glory, and possibly a statue of yourself near the Temple of Zeus. No money, just fame, and maybe a lifetime supply of free dinners back home. You return to Athens a hero. Children chant your name. Poets write odes about your thighs. But glory fades fast. A few years go by, and you're back in the palestra, now trying to teach younger athletes who openly ask if you've gotten slower. You force a chuckle and say something wise. Deep down, you miss the cheering. If you're not an athlete, don't worry. You're still expected to keep fit. Even old men lift stones, stretch in the shade, and advise younger men with unsolicited wisdom. Use your hips more, one says, tapping your shoulder. Like this. He lifts a jug, grunts, then pulls something in his back. You pretend not to notice, and don't think you can avoid this with a clever excuse. Skipping the gymnasium is suspicious. What are you hiding? Why aren't you proud of your form? Even philosophers like Socrates were known to break into impromptu wrestling matches just to stay sharp. Not bad for a guy in his 60s. Your daily routine becomes a mix of sweat, talk, and ritual. You exercise, then visit the baths, cold of course, scrape yourself down with a strigil, then head to the Zzzistory, a shady bench where old men debate what true virtue really is. You listen politely while nursing a sore shoulder. One particularly fussy gymnasium rule. No food inside. Someone once tried to sneak in dates. Banned for a week. Why? Cleanliness, self-discipline, possibly jealousy. You start recognising the social hierarchy. The young hopefuls with their fresh oil flasks, the mid-level athletes gunning for local games, the veterans who grunt at everything and mutter about the good old days when wrestling meant something. And then there are the spectators, boys too young to train, older men too brittle to participate. They just watch, sometimes cheer, occasionally nap. And somewhere in all of this, you realise the gymnasium is less about abs and more about identity. It's where friendships form, rivalries grow, politics brew, and futures take shape. You're not just training your body, you're joining the city's living rhythm. At sunset, you limp home, scraped and dusty, oil flask empty but proud. You stop by the shrine near the gate and whisper thanks to Heracles, not just for strength, but for getting through another day without throwing out your back. You groan as the first sliver of sun peeks over the clay rooftops. Your thighs ache from yesterday's discus throw that somehow turned into a hip check contest, and you're pretty sure a 7-year-old Spartan could outrun you. But there's no time to nurse your wounds, because in ancient Greece, kids don't just hang around drawing in the dirt. Education is serious business. If you're male, and Spartan, and not enslaved, and not too poor, okay, fine, if you're lucky. You trail behind a boy and his pedagogos, his personal slave tutor, down narrow, uneven streets. He's carrying the boy's writing tablet, oil flask, and probably the existential weight of knowing that he'll be quizzed later on Hesiod's Theogony. No pressure. If you're a boy from a citizen family in Athens, your day starts with schooling around age 7. That's your cue to wave goodbye to playtime and hello to reciting Homer until your lips go dry. There's no one central school building. Instead, education happens in small private homes or shaded courtyards where tutors teach reading, writing, music, and physical training. There are no grades, no bells, and no backpacks. Just wax tablets, styluses, and the looming presence of your father's expectations. The curriculum, heavy on poetry, rhetoric, and music. You chant epic verses like they're pop songs, memorise fables to build your moral compass, and occasionally study mathematics. Not for fun, but so you can count money and build temples without them collapsing. Literacy isn't universal, but it's prized. If you can quote Sophocles and keep rhythm on the lyre, you're halfway to being a legend, or at least a city council member, and yes, music is required. Boys learn the kithara, a type of lyre, and flute playing is as basic as knowing your alphabet. There's even a strong belief that the right music can shape character. You fumble through a verse in the Phrygian mode and your tutor sighs audibly. Character still under construction. Now, if you're a girl, well, things get a bit quieter. In Athens, girls receive little formal education beyond what they're taught at home. You learn to spin, weave, cook, and pray to Hera without setting anything on fire. If you're upper class, you might be able to read or recite a hymn. If you're in Sparta, entirely different story. In Sparta, girls are expected to be tough. Your day starts with running drills, javelin practice, and stern lectures about producing healthy sons for the state. You wear shorter chitons, get more sunlight, and even speak up in public. Other Greeks think you're shockingly bold. You think they're slow and soft. Cultural exchange? Not going great. Historians still argue whether Sparta's educational system empowered women or simply repurposed them as state property. Were they liberated, or just better groomed breeding stock? The scrolls remain undecided. And then there's Spartan boys. Ah, yes. You begin your agoge at age 7. From then on, it's military training, survival skills, and barely controlled hazing. You sleep in barracks, train in silence, and steal food for practice. Not because you're naughty, because that's the test. Steal well, you're praised. Get caught, you're punished. Not for theft, but for incompetence. You also learn to take pain without flinching. Spartans allegedly made boys endure beatings in public as a badge of pride. One fringe tale tells of a boy hiding a stolen fox under his cloak that began eating his stomach. He died before crying out. That's the goal here. Absolute stoicism. Also, poor fox. Meanwhile, back in Athens, your day might involve a trip to the gymnasium after your recitation lessons. Physical and mental training go hand in hand. You might wrestle, run, or play episkiros, an early form of rugby that somehow always ends in bruises and complaints about sandal traction. By adolescence, wealthier boys begin lessons in rhetoric and philosophy. You're taught to question everything, including whether the gods are just, which usually gets you strange looks and possibly a summons from the local priest. There's also the question of what comes after schooling. For some, it's apprenticeship. For others, military service. If you're Athenian, you begin ephebic training at 18. 2 years of state-sponsored soldiering, complete with marching, shield drills, and the constant dread of being stationed near Thracians, who have a terrifying reputation for surprise attacks and good cheekbones. If you're in a poorer household, you might never get to study philosophy or music. You'll learn a trade instead. Pottery, carpentry, blacksmithing. Skills passed down from your father or a neighbour. There's pride in that, but little glory. Your hands are calloused by 15. Your future mostly set. And here's your quirky classroom fact of the day. One punishment for disruptive students was writing lines over and over on a wax tablet. Not exactly creative, but very erasable. Imagine, "I will not compare my teacher to a goat," scratched out 50 times in wonky Greek letters. Some educators even believed in teaching virtue through storytelling. You'd hear tales of Theseus, of Perseus, of Heracles, less for entertainment and more to hammer in the point that cleverness, strength and piety would get you far. One teacher insists that Heracles was a model student. You raise an eyebrow. Didn't he strangle snakes in his crib? Still, you carry your stylus with pride. You've mastered your letters, memorised some Homer, and can now navigate polite conversation without accidentally offending a war hero's granddaughter. That's growth. As you return home, the streets hum with young voices reciting verses, the slap of sandals on stone, and the occasional "ow" from someone who forgot to oil their wrestling partner before practice. You pass a stooped man teaching a 10-year-old how to count using pebbles. No one's too old to teach. No one's too young to start. The sky fades into amber. You sit on your mat, fingers stained with wax, humming a hymn you barely remember from this morning's music lesson. You're tired, but a good kind of tired. The kind that comes from a day of learning, stumbling, improving. Tomorrow your teacher says you'll recite 20 lines of the Iliad by heart. You groan. He says it builds character. You ask whose character, because it's definitely ruining yours. He laughs. And just before you fall asleep, you whisper one line to yourself, soft and proud. Sing, muse, of the wrath of Achilles. Not bad. You wake to muffled crying. Not the kind that belongs to a skinned knee or a dropped amphora, but the slow, rhythmic keening of mourning. Somewhere nearby, a neighbour has died. The news spreads faster than wildfire on Mount Hymettus. And now you're about to learn what it really means to say goodbye in ancient Greece. Because in this world, death isn't the end. Not culturally, not spiritually, and definitely not socially. It's a massive production, complete with rules, rituals, taboos, and just a touch of flute music. First things first, the body. It must be prepared within hours, washed, anointed with oil, and dressed in clean burial garments. Usually white, sometimes with small tokens placed on or around the body. Coins, if the family can spare them. Because Charon, the underworld ferryman, doesn't row for free. You forget a coin under the tongue? That's soul stuck wandering the riverbank like someone who lost their train ticket to eternity. You step into the house of the deceased and immediately feel the weight of ritual. Mirrors are covered. The hearth fire is extinguished, temporarily severing the household's tie to the divine. Women of the family, often the closest relatives, perform the prothesis, the laying out of the body, and yes, there is wailing. Lots of it. Loud, intentional, sometimes theatrical. The louder the cry, the greater the honour. You try not to stare, but one woman's scream sends chills up your spine. At dawn, the ekphora begins, the funeral procession. The body is placed on a bier, carried through the streets by torchlight or in the early glow of morning. Musicians play slow, solemn melodies on the aulos, a double-piped flute that sounds like a weeping reed. Bystanders fall silent as the line passes, heads bowed, and this isn't a quick shuffle to the graveyard. The procession moves with deliberate care, the body trailed by mourners, kin, friends, and sometimes professional lamenters. Yes, people paid to cry convincingly. One fringe tale claims a famous lamenter could cry on command so well, she was invited to weddings just in case. Burial is the next essential step. Cremation exists, especially for warriors and the wealthy, but most people are buried in family plots or simple, roadside tombs. The grave goods, a little food, maybe a jug of oil, some pottery, small figurines. You don't send someone into the afterlife empty-handed. That would be rude and risky. You watch the priest sprinkle water over the grave. The family steps back. The ground closes. You half expect silence, but there's a murmur of prayers, quiet and rhythmic. They're calling on Hades and Persephone now, hoping the dead are received gently. No one wants to return as a shade. Ghosts are real here. Restless spirits are feared. If a soul isn't properly buried, it can't cross into the underworld. It lingers. It sulks. It haunts. Historians still argue whether all classes receive the same burial care, or whether poorer citizens, especially metics or enslaved people, were buried with less ritual. Some evidence suggests communal graves or mass pits for the impoverished, while others believe even the humblest citizen was granted basic rights to burial. The debate remains as unsettled as a windswept grave plot. After burial, the peridepnon, or funeral feast, takes place. You join a small group in a dim courtyard. Lentils, bread, olives. The mood is heavy, but not without warmth. Stories are told, names are repeated, because to remember the dead is to keep them from fading into true nothingness. You bite into a fig and someone leans over to whisper, "Don't eat with your left hand during a funeral. It invites spirits." You freeze mid-chew and slowly swap hands. Ancient customs die harder than most people do. For the next days and weeks, mourning continues. Families wear dark clothing. Some cut their hair short, especially women, as a visible sign of grief. Others leave offerings at the tomb, small libations of wine, sprigs of rosemary, cakes shaped like animals. You walk past a grave and see a child's toy left beside it. A clay horse, chipped but clearly loved. Here's your quirky death tidbit. Some Greeks believed certain graves could act as portals to the underworld. Necromancy wasn't just fiction. It was feared and occasionally practiced. In fact, specific Oracle of the Dead sites existed, where the brave, or foolish, consulted spirits. They drank blood, chanted prayers, and waited for answers whispered from beyond. You decide to pass on that one. One of the more haunting beliefs? The dead can be angered, if forgotten, if disrespected, if buried improperly. That's why tombs are visited regularly, why names are spoken, why you don't just walk over someone's grave without pausing. Respect matters, even after death. And yet, funerals aren't only about loss. They reaffirm community, identity, the continuation of life. A well-conducted burial speaks to a family's honour. A badly handled one, a stain on your name. You once overheard a man decline marriage to a woman because her uncle had a messy funeral. Yes, really. You stroll home that evening beneath a dimming sky. Smoke from burnt offerings rises behind you. Somewhere a family whispers prayers. Somewhere else, a child asks where souls go. The parent answers softly, to the meadow beyond the river, where the asphodel grows. You pass a cemetery by the road, Keramakos, and see a stone stele carved with a woman holding her child. The faces are serene, peaceful. Below them, a turtle scurries through grass. Life and death in one glance. And just like that, you realise ancient Greece doesn't fear death the way you do. It respects it, curates it, folds it into daily life like olive oil into dough. Death isn't an end here. It's a ritual, a reminder, a reason to honour the living. You close your eyes, whisper a name you once heard in a funeral song, and feel the weight of history resting gently at your back. Now let your body soften. Let your shoulders fall, your breath slow. The sun has long dipped behind the terracotta roofs, and the olive trees are still, their leaves whispering only to the wind. You've travelled far tonight, through dusty gymnasiums and echoing courtyards, through strange laws and sacred rites, through a world that felt oddly familiar and deeply strange. You've walked in sandals that pinched, carried a jug that leaked, stumbled through rules that shifted like the sea. But now, those voices fade. The crowds have quieted. The amphorae are sealed. The gods, just for now, have turned their eyes elsewhere. The fire in your hearth burns low. The night wraps itself around you like a cloak, soft and weightless. Somewhere outside, a lyre plucks a final note. The stars blink silently over old stone and new dreams. In the hush of this moment, remember, even in places ruled by odd customs and demanding rituals, people lived, laughed, loved. They stitched sandals, recited poetry, traded jokes in the marketplace. They got things wrong. They tried again. And so do you. Let sleep take you gently. No gods to appease. No oil to scrub. No jurors to convince. Just breath and quiet and rest. Tomorrow, another world. But for now, close your eyes, time traveller. You've earned your dreams.